This is the story of a strange prophet you never know. Watch till the end to know more about him. A young man stumbles through the streets of South Africa, his life spiraling into darkness. Drugs cloud his mind, alcohol burns his throat, and rebellion fills his heart. His Christian parents watch helplessly as their son becomes everything they prayed he would never be. This is not the beginning of a cautionary tale. This is the beginning of a miracle. What happened next would shake an entire nation and challenge the very foundations of a society built on division. One moment of divine encounter would transform a lost rebel into a prophet whose message would reach millions across Africa and beyond. This is the extraordinary story of Kobus Van Rensburg, a man who proved that no life is too broken for God to use. Kobus Van Rensburg did not start as a man of God. Born into a Christian family in South Africa, he seemed destined to follow a different path entirely. As a teenager, something inside him rebelled against everything he had been taught. The church pews that once held him became distant memories as he chose the streets instead. The downward spiral was swift and merciless. Cigarettes became his companions, alcohol his escape, and drugs his master. Friends and family watched in horror as the young man they once knew disappeared behind a cloud of addiction and reckless living. Kobus himself would later look back on these years and call them simply a wasted life. For years, this pattern continued. Each day brought new depths of self-destruction. His parents must have wondered if their prayers were falling on deaf ears. His community likely wrote him off as another casualty of a troubled generation. But God had different plans. In the midst of this darkness, something was stirring. Even Kobus could not have imagined what was about to happen to him. The transformation came suddenly, like lightning splitting the darkness. At 24 years old, Kobus Van Rensburg encountered something that would reshape not only his own destiny, but the spiritual landscape of an entire nation. It was not a gradual awakening or a slow return to faith. It was an explosion. One moment he was drowning in his addictions, and the next, he was completely and utterly changed. This was not merely getting sober or turning over a new leaf. This was a supernatural encounter that left no part of his life untouched. The young man who had run from God now could not run toward him fast enough. The streets that once called him to destruction now became his pulpit. Almost immediately after his conversion, Kobus began preaching on street corners with a fire and passion that stopped people in their tracks. His testimony was raw, real, and impossible to ignore. He prayed for sick people with a boldness that seemed almost reckless. But results followed. People were healed. Lives were changed. Word began to spread about this former drug addict who now carried the power of God in his hands. This was not the measured, careful approach of traditional ministry. This was revolution wrapped in salvation. The fire that burned in Kobus Van Rensburg was too intense to be contained within traditional structures. While he briefly attended Bible school, attempting to follow the conventional path to ministry, something inside him chafed against the limitations he felt there. The professors taught about the power of God, but Kobus wanted to see it demonstrated. The textbooks described miracles, but he wanted to witness them firsthand. The classroom could not hold what God was doing in his life, so he left. This decision would set the tone for his entire ministry, independent, uncompromising, and led by what he believed was direct divine guidance rather than human tradition. By the late 1980s, his vision began to take physical form. On an old drive-in movie site near Klerksdorp, South Africa, Kobus established his own church. The location was perfect in its symbolism. A place where people once came to watch stories unfold on screen would now become a place where real-life miracles would unfold before their eyes. He named it Lofdal, meaning Praise Valley. The name captured his core belief that praise and worship were not merely parts of a service, but powerful spiritual forces that could usher in the very presence of God. This humble beginning would eventually grow into Spirit Word Ministries, becoming famous throughout the region for its energetic worship and its focus on healing and miracles. But even greater challenges lay ahead. South Africa in the 1990s was a nation in transition. The apartheid system that had enforced racial separation for decades was crumbling, but the wounds it left behind were deep and raw. Most churches, like most institutions, remained largely segregated not by law but by tradition and comfort. Into this delicate and dangerous social landscape, Kobus Van Rensburg stepped with a vision that many considered foolish and some considered dangerous. In 1998, as the new South Africa was still finding its identity, he made a decision that would bring both criticism and controversy crashing down upon him. He established a school at Lofdal that welcomed both black and white students. This was not a political statement or a publicity stunt. For Kobus, it was obedience to what he believed God had called him to do. He saw the church as a place where all people should be one, regardless of the color of their skin. The backlash was immediate and intense. Some supporters turned away. Critics called him naive. Others questioned his motives. The comfortable segregation that many had grown accustomed to was being challenged by a man who refused to compromise what he saw as a divine mandate. But Kobus held firm. He had not survived addiction, transformation, and the building of a ministry just to bow to social pressure. His school remained integrated, becoming a living example of his belief that God's love knows no racial boundaries. The courage it took to make this stand cannot be overstated. This was more than integration. It was a declaration that the gospel he preached was powerful enough to overcome the deepest divisions in society. Kobus Van Rensburg understood something that many ministers of his time missed: the power of media to multiply ministry. While other pastors were content to preach to their local congregations, he saw the potential to reach millions. In 2002, he began broadcasting his powerful sermons on national Christian television stations. His message was simple but profound. He preached what he called the uncompromised Word of God, focusing intensely on the finished work of Jesus Christ on the cross. He often said he knew nothing except Christ and Him crucified, and this laser focus became the cornerstone of his teaching. But Kobus was not content to rely on other platforms. In 2004, he took another bold step and launched his own television channel called Spirit Word. Now his message could go out unfiltered and uncompromised, reaching across South Africa and eventually throughout the African continent and beyond. Through these broadcasts, millions of people were introduced to his passionate preaching style and his unshakable faith in the power of God. Testimonies poured in from viewers who claimed healing, salvation, and transformation through watching his programs. The former drug addict who once preached on street corners was now reaching into homes across multiple nations. The drive-in movie site had become the launching pad for a media ministry that would touch countless lives. The ministry of Kobus Van Rensburg was never confined to a single location or format. He conducted large-scale crusades that drew thousands of people hungry for spiritual breakthrough. These events were marked by passionate worship, bold preaching, and numerous testimonies of divine healing. Those who attended these crusades often described them as life-changing experiences. The atmosphere was electric with faith and expectation. People came carrying their pain, their sickness, and their broken dreams, and many left with testimonies of miraculous transformation. But perhaps the most lasting impact of his ministry was not in the dramatic moments of large gatherings, but in the steady, consistent work of building something that would outlast his own lifetime. The school continued to educate young people across racial lines. The television broadcasts continued to spread his message. The church at Lofdal became a beacon of hope for thousands. Kobus Van Rensburg understood that true ministry is not just about the spectacular moments, but about creating foundations that can support generations of spiritual growth and social change. On December 21st, 2013, Prophet Kobus Van Rensburg passed away, but the fire he ignited continues to burn brightly. Death could not extinguish what God had built through his life. Spirit Word Ministries, now known as Spirit Word House, continues its work under new leadership. The television station he founded still broadcasts his sermons to this day, introducing new generations to his passionate message of faith and transformation. The school he established continues to educate young people, embodying his dream of a unified community where racial barriers are dissolved by the power of love. But perhaps his greatest legacy is not found in buildings or broadcasts. It is found in the countless lives that were touched by his radical faith. The former addicts who found freedom, the sick who were healed, the divided communities that learned to worship together, the millions who heard his simple message that Christ's work on the cross was complete and sufficient. The story of Kobus Van Rensburg is more than a biography. It is a testament to the transformative power of authentic faith. It proves that no background is too broken, no society too divided, and no vision too bold for God to use. In a world that often seems paralyzed by division and hopelessness, His life stands as a beacon of what is possible when one person refuses to compromise their convictions. He showed that radical faith can create ripple effects that extend far beyond a single lifetime. The young man who once wasted his life on drugs and rebellion became a prophet whose influence reached across continents. The drive-in movie site became a launching pad for a movement that touched millions of lives. The decision to integrate a school in post-apartheid South Africa became a symbol of what the church could be at its best. Today, as we face our own challenges and divisions, the story of Kobus Van Rensburg reminds us that transformation is always possible. One person's encounter with divine love can become a force for change that reshapes entire communities and nations. The fire that changed everything in his life continues to burn in the lives of those who carry on his vision. And perhaps, if we are willing to let it, that same fire can ignite something extraordinary in our own lives as well. This is not the end of the story. This is an invitation to become part of it.